Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, was written in 1818 by Mary Shelley and is a highly complex and significant novel in the world of literature. Despite Shelley's youth at the time of her writing Frankenstein covers many important ideas, largely connected to the human condition, in a greatly nuanced way. In our research, we attempted to record how the public perception of the story has changed through analysis of adaptations of the novel and the tracking of the major themes of Frankenstein throughout those adaptations, represented in our use of overlapping imagery from Frankenstein media. Our goal was to discover if and why the ideas Shelley wanted to communicate through her writing were sustained or lost in the process of adaptation. To do that, we first had to define the most important themes we wanted to track. One of these ideas was Shelley's question of what being human means. The protagonist of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, immediately decides that the monster cannot be either good or human based on its appearance, regarding its ugliness as proof of its status as a monster, rather than the man he intended to create. However, Shelley's characterization of the monster opposes Frankenstein's assessment of the monster's humanity, showing that he is capable of great intelligence and understanding as well as compassion. He is enamored with nature and craves the intimacy he sees shared between the de Lacys, giving them gifts as an attempt to be a part of that intimacy. Shelley frames the monster as an intelligent and compassionate creature, and it is only when he is mistreated by society, rejected by both the de Lacys and Victor, and shot by someone he was trying to save, that he decides to become the monster that the world sees him as. It is key to the message of the novel that the monster's actions be fueled not by the way that he was created, but by his abuse. Public opinion of the time reflects this, with an 1824 critic in Knight's Quarterly Review stating that the monster's suffering is touching to the last degree. The monster is sympathetic because he's human, and he's a human that has been turned bitter due to society's inability to see him that way. Although the novel was written by a woman, it is narrated not just by one man but three, Walter, Frankenstein, and the monster, and Shelley utilizes their narration to critique deep-seated patriarchal and misogynistic thought processes, primarily through Victor. Victor's perception of women and their role in society is consistently narrow, constantly framing his wife as a mere possession or else a tool to soothe his own misery or entertain him. Although in moments where Elizabeth's dialogue is relayed, a real intelligence is detected, Victor cannot see it as her role in his life is fixed. Furthermore, Victor's family adopts both Elizabeth and Justine as surrogate sisters for the Frankensteins, and yet Elizabeth is seen as the only true sister, while Justine is a maid, something Elizabeth earns based only on her beauty. Shelley expanding on the novel's condemnation of society's tendency to judge by appearance and connecting it to the patriarchal deciding of women's worth based on their beauty. The first adaptations of Shelley's work were plays released shortly after the book's publication and subsequent success. Although many of the details of the plays from this era have been lost, the surviving plays show only few alterations to the original novel and its messages. Both the 1823 and 1826 plays, The Fate of Frankenstein, written by Richard Brinsley Peake, and The Man and the Monster, written by H.M. Milner, add an assistant for Frankenstein, Fritz and Strut respectively. They are used to add an element of melodrama to better suit the medium of theatre, serving as comic relief throughout the shows, with Fritz crying that he misses his cow more than his wife, and Strut locked in a constant battle of wits with his lover Lisette. These additions do not greatly sully Shelley's original messages, however the assistant is a trend that continues for centuries in new Frankenstein adaptations. Furthermore, while the original novel had both monster and creator die in pursuit of revenge for the other's wrongdoing, Victor survives in Milner's adaptation, perhaps sparking the beginning of the demonization of the monster over Victor in later iterations. The next adaptation we focused on was the very first recorded film adaptation, directed by J. Soldoli in 1910 from Edison Films. It followed the highly successful 1908 silent film Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and seemed to take much inspiration from it, with the monster characterized as an embodiment of the evil in Dr. Frankenstein's mind, the first instance of the monster being explicitly labeled as evil from its creation, the monster's ugly appearance reflective of its humanity, opposing Shelley's original message. Again in this adaptation, the Doctor prevails while the monster is defeated, something the second volume of the March 15, 1910 Edison Kinetogram justifies by describing an attempt to eliminate all the actually repulsive situations in the original novel, creating a more acceptable and classical finish for their audiences, rather than maintaining Victor and the monster's joint punishment and responsibility. The most radical and influential changes, however, came with Peggy Webling's 1927 play, Frankenstein: An Adventure into the Macabre, which was not only the first time the infamous decision to refer to the monster as Frankenstein was made, but inspired the 1931 Frankenstein movie that would influence almost all Frankenstein adaptations for the next century.
Mary Shelley's original novel was adapted into a film directed by James Whale in 1931. The film comprised of certain key elements of the novel. However, it was the film that manifested in the many misinterpretations of Shelley's meanings and ideas, which still stand prevalent in modern time. Where the film begins to differ from the novel stems from events being omitted in the film or even changed. Whale fails to address that the creature is a conscious being that has grown to be the quote-unquote scary demonic monster because of its neglectful upbringing. In the novel, the creature is shown to have experienced much distress due to being banished by Frankenstein and being discriminated against by others due to its appearance. This then results in the overall scary demeanor of the creature. However, in the film, the creature is constantly antagonized through saying its quote-unquote evil nature is innate. The creature is the way it is as a result of having a criminal brain rather than its experiences. The idea that the creature was quote-unquote born as an evil thing then fails to address the responsibility needing to be placed on individuals for the creations that they bring into the world. It is a critique on the Industrial Revolution, a time in which Shelley existed in. Another crucial change from the novel to film is the importance of the role of women. Shelley's novel has a range of female characters, such as Elizabeth, Frankenstein's wife, Justine, the Frankenstein family's housekeeper, and Caroline, Frankenstein's mother. By the end of the novel, all these women are dead. Caroline dies due to scarlet fever, and both Elizabeth and Justine are killed as a result of the creature. This metaphorically suggests how women will inevitably always be silenced in a patriarchal society. In the film, the only female character that exists is Elizabeth, and unlike to the novel, she stays alive until the end of the film. Elizabeth's role in the film is to be the loving housewife whose existence is only there to enrich the life of Frankenstein and give him character development. By keeping Elizabeth alive until the end of the film, the idea that women exist purely for men is reinforced. Her purpose is to continue the Frankenstein family line, and she is simplified into a reproduction machine. These are only two of the many drastic implications of the changes which were made from the novel to the film, thus demonstrating how easily meanings and ideas can become something else entirely.
From 1945 to 1980, Frankenstein's monster's appearance alongside other notorious villains and even popular heroes from the Marvel and DC universe exponentially increased. We can see this as an example in his appearance in Marvel's comic with the X-Men. 1957, the company famous for staple monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, The Bride of Frankenstein, and many more, syndicated 52 pre-1948 films for TV, making their portrayal of Frankenstein's monster the hallmark. This meant the iconic image of the monster we have of Boris Karloff as a lumbering giant with bolts, sickly green skin, and a flat top head, as seen in the famous series The Munsters, could be entirely different to Mary Shelley's vision of it. Very early on, Frankenstein's monster had been altered to the imagination of filmmakers interested in selling him based on obscene features with the intentions to disgust and terrify. Focus was drawn to its appearance instead of its complexity as a character. Frankenstein 1970 focuses on themes of nuclear power, impotence, and the film industry. In that same year, Frankenstein's daughter was introduced as part of the monster's familial ties. She later reappears as the main character of a film released in 1966. 1972 and 73, the monster is used in heavily sexualized films, even appearing as the main character of a blaxploitation film, a term denoting the exploitation of black people in stereotyped roles in film. To summarize, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was used as a profitable margin, using the monster to bend up with other monsters, part of a larger franchise, or to introduce more characters for companies to claim ownership of. Additionally, capitalizing on bizarre and gruesome storytelling, losing its original intention of the story. Other than the lack of important female roles for representation, Dr. Frankenstein himself became so obscure, eventually disappearing from majority of media. His name was passed to the monster, retold as an empty shell with the intention to create chaos, omitting his past and unfortunate experiences with humans that caused his view on the world to become skewed, completely villain-coding him.
This period of time featured primarily horror movies with a few comedy and cartoon movies. The first film that released during this period was a horror sci-fi movie titled Frankenstein. It was just like any typical horror movie, with Frankenstein's monster as the main antagonist. The Monster Squad and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein were also horror movies that released during this period. However, much of the elements of the original novel were missing from these movies, as they were more of a focus on the monster's terrifying appearance rather than the key themes mentioned previously. Two movies during this period that provided an interesting twist to the original novel were Frankenhooker and The Bride. These movies differ from the original novel, as the monsters created in both movies were female, as opposed to the male monster created in the original novel. Frankenhooker had little to no correlation with the themes from the original novel, as it was a black comedy horror movie, and instead somewhat contradicts the main ideas of the original novel. The Bride is a horror movie that provided a what-if scenario of Frankenstein creating a female monster as a bride to his original monster. The original novel had Frankenstein's monster demanding Dr. Frankenstein to create him a female monster, yet Frankenstein refused to do so as he was afraid of the consequences that may occur. The Bride focused on this idea and enacted these terrifying consequences that Frankenstein feared. A key part to take away from these movies is the fact that female characters were given more characteristics and the ability to make their own choices, things that were absent in the original novel. Frankenstein Monster was also adapted to 2 cartoon movies, Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf, and Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein. These movies were primarily made for comedic purposes, so the series themes of the original novel were almost entirely excluded.
Many aspects of Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein are prevalent in pop culture through the first decade of the 21st century. For example, the monster has become a symbolic icon for horror and Halloween, and features in films such as Hotel Transylvania, Saturday Night Live, and Frankenweenie. However, these adaptations have exploited the idea of the monster and omitted many aspects of the novel to suit their adaptation and consumerism ideals, causing the novel to lose much of its original themes and symbols through time. Firstly, the novel has lost many of its key symbols. The first general misconception created by 21st century pop culture is that the monster is misrepresented as ruthless and violent. In other TV shows and movies, Frankenstein is portrayed as stupid and unable to speak or read. In contrast, the monster's intellect is much greater in the novel. For example, the monster has taught himself how to read and converses normally with other characters. Another example includes the monster's name itself. The name Frankenstein has become synonymous with the monster because it was created by the scientist called Frankenstein, when in the novel, the monster is not given a name. The theme of isolation is also missing from many of the 21st century adaptations. Frankenstein is generally depicted as a heartless monster. However, the adaptations fail to show that the monster is actually alone. Shelley highlights that isolation is the greatest evil in the novel, and that Frankenstein has only become this way because he is abandoned. On the other hand, modern adaptations do not reveal the monster's loneliness. In fact, in Hotel Transylvania, Frankenstein is given a wife, which sharply contrasts to the novel, where the monster begs Frankenstein to give him a female monster, but refuses. The final theme in the novel that has been lost is revenge. In the novel, the monster seems to have no motives and is rather heartless and thoughtless. Although the monster eventually becomes an evil murderer, this was not always the case. The monster begins life with an optimistic outlook on the world. However, after being mistreated by Victor and others, he becomes violent and vengeful. In conclusion, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and the monster have remained a prevalent icon through the 21st century, advertising and pop culture. However, many producers have often omit many aspects of the novel, which detract from its original meaning.
In Mary Shelley's 1818 Frankenstein, there is a deliberate lack of female representation, and this is presented in modern-day films, where men are shown as the protagonists, either acting as Dr. Frankenstein, supporting characters, or the monster he creates. Here, these two men dominate the film as their story is told rather than the monster's, and the only woman present is a love interest of one of these male characters, similar to that of the original novel, where Dr. Frankenstein's wife was a minor character, seen as weak and unmemorable. This places women in a consistently negative position, where men are seen as superior, undermining their female counterparts. The original novel also never allocates a name for the monster, where this film does, possibly indicating a more maternal connection to the birth of the creature, where the original text is lacking. The female character in the film additionally reacts more terrified and shocked than any other character in the film on the creation of the monster, mimicking that of Dr. Frankenstein's wife in the original text. This depicts women as less capable in understanding complex situations. This lack of female representation and understanding positions the female sex below that of men, something that Mary Shelley aimed to do in her novel to highlight how women were perceived in her time period. A 2015 adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein presents a married couple where they artificially create a human man. both scientists treating the creature as if it were their child. This is something not originally shown in Shelley's original text. A woman in a main role and contributing greatly to the plot of the story, unlike the original, indicates that feminism has grown naturally throughout the years and is present in the media of the Frankenstein franchise, highlighting women as natural caretakers of all people compared to the heartless male counterparts.
And now, we are left with a representation of the history of Frankenstein's adaptations touched on in this video. The history of narrative parts told from differing perspectives forever are being stitched, stripped apart, and pieced back together into an amalgamation of its predecessors, much like Frankenstein's monster himself. Movies are more central in the adaptations than novels. In screen interpretations, Frankenstein's monster is intelligent enough not only to be eloquent in conversing and expressing his torment, but also thoughtful and capable of appreciating the beauty offered by the natural world surrounding him. In relation to sustainability, or the lack thereof, we delved into how the ideas of Mary Shelley were unsustainable, gradually lost and watered down to a state where her characters are known for by their masks and overalls strewn along the aisles of Halloween stores. Media alters the way stories are told and directed to the public. For example, in film, stories are often dramatized instead of building on its literary meaning and depths, which in part could also be in pursuit of larger screen presence against its competitors. This product brings to attention the way modern-day media adapts original meanings of literary work, further probing the public to challenge the way they interpret original meanings that can be altered by time and mediums. Finally, we thank you for following us through the journey of Frankenstein's quote-unquote evolution, and would like to end by quoting Frederick Jameson. If the film version is definitive, bracket what that might mean, the novel will fall into disuse, and Simon Linter, the monster's form is shaped by filmmakers to bring it closer to the audience's cultural and social spheres.